Director of the Catholic Information Center. I want to welcome all of you present here today at this third in-person event after since we began the pandemic, right? And I want to welcome all of you also present through the live stream, present from around the country. Here in Washington D.C. we have. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rosemary. So anyway, and you can follow us through social media. We are present in all the major platforms, and we have many events also coming up. Now today we are going to unveil 3 paintings. I've seen them, and they are amazing. It's the triptych Salvation by Andrew D.C, who's a great painter, and he was trained in the Boston school tradition, and he learned from a famous master painter, Paul Ingbretson, and he has come out from a line of masters, and he's going to be, if he's not already, he's going to be a great master, I can tell you. Now, Andrew has won many awards, nationally, locally, and he is the acting creative director of a very important arts non-profit organization, the Carl Schmitt Foundation. And he also is a recognized and official copyist at the National Gallery of Art. And this is amazing because, you need to be really good to be approved to do that and to be in that as a part of the National Gallery here in Washington, D.C. And he also was appointed by Benedict XVI to the Council for Liturgy of the Arts. And then he's also at the Catholic University of America. Anyway, Andrew currently focuses on sacred and devotional paintings, and we are going to see these paintings that he just finished, and they express clearly the beauty and the faith that we all aspire to. I have to say that today we celebrate in the Catholic Church Saint Catherine of Siena, and she was so outspoken and so bold, and she always reminds me of Andrew because he was also very outspoken and very bold, and you will see that. And anyway, so we are very happy to have him at the CIC and to present his art to us. And before that, we are going to see a tour that I took of his studio here in the Washington, D.C. area. I have to say that I have not been in many studios of painters, but this was really amazing. And anyway, so you will see everything now in this small video. So enjoy it, and please. Hello, my name is Father Charles. I'm the director of the Catholic Information Center in Washington, D.C. I'm standing outside the painter studio of painter Andrew D.C. He has been working for several months on this series of paintings or triptych. And today he's going to give me a tour of his studio. Now these paintings are going to be shown for a time and for the first time on the window display, on the public window display of the CIC on K Street. let's take a look.
Father Charles.
Hello, Andrew.
Welcome. Come
Thank
on
you very
in. Come
much.
on in.
Absolutely.
So welcome to Studio Dessau.
Thank you very much. Well, this is a wonderful small building.
Yeah, it's a
Andrew.
beautiful space.
So tell me a little bit about this space and what you do here.
So Studio Dessau is a family-run sacred art and sacred music studio. So my wife, she's studied sacred music and she's a professional soprano. So she does the whole
Really?
sacred music side, and I do the painting. So this is my workshop. And someone jokingly, a visitor the other day, called us a sacred art power couple. So I don't know about that, but
This is a combination of art. This is
Yeah.
wonderful.
yeah, it's been a beautiful kind of conversation for us to have between those two arts. And soon after we were married, we were really inspired by the story of Mary Magdalene breaking the alabaster jar on Christ's feet. And it was this moment of clarity about our vocation as artists, creating something beautiful for Christ. And really any art can do that. Any art can draw people to Christ. Secular art can do that. But we felt particularly drawn to sacred and particularly liturgical art. So Studio Dessau has become, the vehicle to make that happen. And so after we were married, we settled in this area, and I was looking all over the city, all over the Washington D.C. area for a studio space. And I was very particular about what I wanted, like the direction of the lighting and the floors, and like had no money. And we were praying a lot. And these people sent us an email. They're friends of friends of friends. And they said, we're moving into this house and it has an art studio on the property.
No.
Yeah.
What are the chances?
Yeah, I had to like do a double take on the email because what does that even mean? So this is a 100-year-old little structure that happened to be walking distance from where we live.
No.
And the last owner had done a lot of work turning it into a state-of-the-art painting studio.
Well, this is providential.
Yeah, it was one of those like small little like encouragements from our Lord to kind of, okay, keep going with the studio. So we've been here a couple of years, and it's been, blessing after blessing, and it's been a lot of fun.
This is tremendous, Andrew. So tell me a little bit about your work and the ideas behind your artistic creations.
Yeah, so I can start with,
This is the three serious painting that we were talking about before. And let's start with the title, Salvation Triptych, right?
right, so Triptych is a 3-part painting, and Salvation, really, someone was saying that these paintings are kind of swinging for the bleachers. It's trying to bring the Christian story to people in 3 images. So after kind of having that vision of using images to tell this story, I prayed about what 3 images can capture some part or introduce people to the story. And I settled upon this first painting of Our Lady holding Christ. It's an image of the Incarnation.
This is beautiful.
The second is an image of Christ on the cross, the crucifixion, this turning point. And the final is the second coming of Christ. So,
sorry, I can see that you are using bright colors.
yeah, so part of the idea and the excitement of this was we're standing at a really interesting time in terms of evangelization, I think especially for artists, where we have a whole generation of people that didn't necessarily grow up with Christian images. Maybe their parents grew up with bad Christian images and they didn't grow up with anything at all. So as an artist, there's this exciting moment where we get to reintroduce people to the story. So personally, I started asking the question, like, we have the story, what language do I use to tell the story? And where I kind of ended up, more or less, is around the year 1000. So early artwork, kind of, people call it the Romanesque, which is marked by a simplicity. And I thought that simplicity really enabled me to tell the story in a bold, captivating, and I hope attractive and beautiful way to people that, again, aren't necessarily familiar with the story.
And I can see that they are not completely finished yet, but they are all at the same, stage of development.
Right, which is part of the creative process, is kind of how do you, when you're working on such large pieces, how do you kind of create an ensemble? Like how there's kind of a symphonic element of keeping a unity. So one way I do that is kind of developing them all, kind of them all emerging at the same time. So as you said, they're not finished. Everything actually is going to get more paint and more kind of pulled out But it's kind of an interesting glimpse into the process.
And you're using also Latin words here and there.
Right. So that was all kind of part of this. There's almost a mystery in Latin. As being in America, we have mostly English and Spanish speakers. It's like just interesting enough. And particularly in the Second Coming painting, like it looks like a book of spells. And you can kind of like via and vita, like you can kind of get at it. So there's this point of intrigue. So I hoped that kind of layer of storytelling was captured. There's also a level of parallelism that I found was sometimes lost when I did the translation into English. So for example, this image uses the text. It ties the Genesis story in by pulling fiat lux. So that's from the first, the opening passages of the Bible, let there be light. And fiat being that part, that let there, lux being light. First of all, it just kind of looks cool. But also you get it just kind of has this elemental feel, but it also pulls you into the fiat of Mary. So as Mary, the incarnation, is miraculously allowed and enters the world again through another fiat. So there's these parallelisms where, let there be light didn't quite capture that word fiat. And so kind of what's being lost in terms of, obvious legibility, I hope is kind of made up for in terms of there's almost a sacramental quality.
That's great. Listen, how do all these ideas that you have in your mind in trying to put out all this beautiful art, how do they come out in the creative process?
It's a great question. I like to describe the painting process as incarnational. So incarnational meaning incarnation to clothe with flesh. So I think the process of art is taking something that's immaterial, an idea, a spirit, an emotion, and clothing it in the material product. So whether that's music with the sounds or a play with the people and the actors almost like with their own bodies. As a painter, it's through the materials. I like to say painting is just usually just cloth and dirt. So you're taking this kind of image, especially when you're working with sacred images, like there's this like gravitas of this mystery, and you are transposing it, you're incarnating it into something physical. So I can actually show you where the process starts. You may not believe it, but this is where it all kind of begins.
No, I cannot believe it.
Yeah. So these tiny little sketches are kind of the first note. So again, praying about this, you receive really an image, a vision of what it's supposed to look like.
Inspiration.
Yeah, inspiration.
Inspiration.
Exactly, from the Holy Spirit, I hope, and I believe. And you take that inspiration, and I found, interestingly enough, if something works small, it works big. Because with public art, with art that's large, there's an experience by the viewer where they kind of need to, even in a glimpse, capture some of the story. So when you work really small, like a manuscript, which I used a lot, medieval manuscripts as inspiration, there's a similarity of kind of compositionally. So these little images are kind of the first notes of kind of like pulling that thing that's in my head into something physical. Again, early notes, I cut them out and put them up here. And then that moves on. I can show you some of the other sketches. So the next part in the process is developing dozens of studies. These are just a few. So the first is, you can see right here, the color studies. So again, you have this story in your mind. I like to think of color as a language and one that can be worked on, like we work on grammar, we work on refinement. And so I do dozens of color studies and really thinking about what is within this language of color, which colors can communicate this story. So for this, I settled on a very simple color scheme that's pulled from kind of early Roman frescoes, post-Christian frescoes. And this particular color scheme is very inspired by Santa Maria Antiqua in Rome and a few other beautiful places. And what I liked about it is the colors kind of carry you through the narrative.
So do you transfer that into the lines?
Yeah, so the next thing, so like language is, color is a language, and then I think of line as almost another language. So it's kind of like these separate like storytelling languages. And I work on the line drawings, again, trying to be articulate. The next process, next piece of the process is taking these smaller line drawings, which I find manageable, into kind of this larger piece. So this is kind of, again, this line drawing is the same size as the final painting. And you actually can see, it's a little more articulated, there's a little bit of shading. You can actually see, if you get up close, where I've erased the line. I think almost every line, you're right, there's like about like 30 lines there. So it really is like work.
Like the edges of the trees, right?
Right. Interesting.
And the process of growing.
Oh, like the rings of a tree.
Yeah,
I've never
exactly.
thought of that. That's a good one. I know as an architect, you understand like iterations is not like a sign of lack of vision. It's actually almost a sign of pulling the vision out more and more. Because again, the vision's in your head. It's not just a thing. So you're kind of like getting closer and closer. And as you pull one line, you see how another line relates. So this is kind of a series of articulation and line. Then I take this line drawing, and using carbon paper, I transfer it over to these panels. And first of all, the panels themselves, when you're working this large, are quite a project.
So tell me a little bit about the ideas, the vision behind each of these paintings.
Sure. So the first image, again, it's kind of hard to translate this into words. That's why I painted it, but I'll try. And I think the best language is a language of movement. So this first image, again, we're talking about the incarnation, and I wanted to pull it into relationship with Genesis, but it's a very, compositionally, it's very still. You have the wind moving over the waters, you have the stars being separated from the ocean, and you have Our Lady kind of emerging, and she's kind of protecting and holding Jesus there. The border is reminiscent of the incarnation, so Christ coming down, and again, you have let there be light, fiat Luke. So if this image is still, the next image is kind of full of tension and a turning point. So obviously compositionally you have these two different colors, the day and the night, which is kind of, for me, was a way to communicate this transition, this child on the cross, this mother watching. Like if you don't know the story, that's still palpable. And like everyone has that, everyone has a mother. Everyone can kind of get an understanding of that. It's a universal thing. And seeing that, it's shocking. And you have the sun and the moon to kind of give it a cosmic quality. You have St. John watching, and what his eye is focusing on is kind of the story here, is the blood and the water coming out of the side of Christ. This culmination, this birth of the church, grace is being poured in through this sacrificial act. And above him is the text that reads, out of the side of Christ flows the water of life. So that is, again, transition. It's a narrative quality, and that brings us to the final painting.
Before we go to the final painting, did you build these boards?
Yeah, so these are created, I used MDF panel, and I used something called Arches oil paper, and always kind of keeping things archival, which just means it'll be around for a while. And the paints that I used are really fascinating. They were designed in the 19th century for King Ludwig I of Bavaria.
No.
Yeah, so he built these castles where he was north of the Alps, and he had this special paint designed that actually used medieval technology that is the most kind of weather-resistant paint. The frescoes he did that are outside in the Alps in the 1800s are still vibrant today. So hopefully these will be around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, really. So that was, and even just like building the panels, like just took weeks. Like it's just a labor of love, I hope. So that brings us into the final painting here. And again, these aren't done. I'm going to be painting the text and things like that. But of the three images, this is the only one, no, of the three events, this is the only one that hasn't happened yet. And interestingly enough, it's the most settled iconography. So iconography meaning essentially the technology, if you will, of the church communicating these images. So the church kind of over time, the members of the church decide and kind of culminate in these, okay, this is how you depict the incarnation with Our Lady holding Jesus. This is how the crucifixion is depicted. And of course, there's a lot of room for exploration. But there's also something beautiful in kind of resurrecting some of that iconography.
And I can see this open book here.
Right.
There's another book, with the first painting.
Right.
And another book in the second painting. So
yeah.
It's like a series of transition.
Right. And Christ is often shown holding a book or a scroll because he is the Word. And so you have the image of Christ in the beginning holding the book. Here you see the book actually is given to St. John, who this is a quote. He's remembering a line from Ezekiel. So he's kind of realizing the fulfillment of the word. And then you have this image so Christ in the second coming is depicted with the four evangelists. That's from St. John's Gospel. So he kind of carries us into this last vision, which he had, of Christ coming in glory. And the text on this painting, you must speak a bit of Latin at least, right?
A little bit,
yeah.
a little bit.
So we have ego sum via veritas e vita. So ego sum, I am, of course, evocative of that story of the burning bush, God saying, I am being. And then what is he? As he says in the Gospels, via, the way, veritas, the truth, and vita, the life. So that idea of the book, and again, the book is closed actually, and then it's open, and there's kind of this revelatory motion. And to finish with that idea of motion, if this was still, this one was tension, this is kind of like a swirling, triumphant, almost beautifully wild vision of kind of the fulfillment of salvation history that as Christians we await. But that's a little bit about each painting.
This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much for having the whole CIC on this tour of your studio. Is there any other word, any other thought that you would like to leave our audience from Washington, D.C. and from around the country, literally, to leave us with before we end this great tour?
Yeah, I'm excited to have them up at the CIC for a time, and I almost want to set up a lawn chair and watch people's reactions.
Well, I'm very excited to see all these paintings being displayed on our Windows display for a while.
Right.
And I hope that all of you who are on the live stream now will be able to come in person and see them and contemplate them.
Right. So in the contemplation, like I hope that these images provoke a real personal encounter with Christ, and I hope that they really draw us to him. When people come out to see your work, and especially nice to see people in person. The last actually in-person event I was at was here. I was speaking here at the CIC, and this was a year ago. And the other panelists were 2 Italians, and this was March of last year. And gosh, I don't know if I should repeat this, but I remember I opened with like a really dumb like COVID joke. And I think it might be like my least like well-aged joke of all time. So I'm not going to repeat that joke. But it's so good to see people. It's nice to see eyes. It's nice to have real eyes on real paintings. It's good to like see things digitally, but there's really something beautiful about being here in person, seeing things. So with that, I'm going to try to unveil these paintings without knocking them down. Emily, it's my wife, Emily. She's going to come up. My good friend, Ethan, he's going to help out. All right. Oh, yeah, thank you. Great. So I guess, should we get a countdown? Can someone, Father Charles?
Absolutely. 3, 2, 1, 0.
Thank you. Thanks, Ethan. Oh man, I can't really see him from over here, but I'm glad you guys can. Just going to give you guys a couple moments just to look. Sometimes an unveiling is necessary to get people to really look at paintings. I'm a painter, and I still find it hard to look at paintings. So really challenge yourself to dwell with them and take them in, and you can't scroll past these images. So sit with them for a moment in silence here. On the heights beside the way, in the paths, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the sons of men. O simple ones, learn prudence. O foolish men, pay attention. Do you know that woman? Who is she? Can you hear her calling? Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. It's a bold thing to say. Who is she? Who are you? The Lord created me at the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the earth. There were no depths. I was brought forth. There were no springs abounding with water. The mountains hadn't been shaped. Before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first the dust of the world, then I was beside him, like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the sons of men. Who is that woman? She is terrifying. Hush. Look at her. She is more beautiful than the sun, and above all the order of the stars, being compared with her. She is found before it. For after this cometh night, but no evil can overcome wisdom. Thanks. Painting's hard. Canvas, paints, a brush. Why don't we just call them by what they are? Cloth, dirt, and a stick with some hair on it. It's good to take a break from it, to be speaking with you, to read some things to you and show you my pictures. That's the order, I think. Saying, then picturing, then writing. We first learn to name things. Then we paint them on the walls of the cave. And before long, we are carving their names into heavy stone tablets. Have you ever seen hieroglyphics? Those carved characters of snakes, birds, hands, eyes, pharaohs, are those images or words? Words or images? Perhaps both. Anyway, I do know what they were used for. They were used to tell stories. Words, images, imagination, story. These are among the things I want to talk about with you tonight. Methinks I know where they came from and where they are leading us. You are what you eat. I think we've all heard that somewhat ominous axiom. Tonight, I think I'm going to try to add another one. You are what you see. In the same way that the body takes up, consumes, digests, and assimilates food, in a sense becomes the food, or the food becomes you. The mind receives, takes up, assimilates, and becomes images. We can kind of learn something by understanding both of these relationships and these two processes. So with hunger, with food, we get hungry. You go, you try to find food, maybe you go to 7-Eleven, maybe you go to your fridge, you decide what to eat, you eat it, you assimilate it, you become it. Hunger. Recently, I was reading about, it was an archaeological site in Turkey. And it's the site of the oldest, or one of the oldest, human settlements. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the name for you. But one thing that shocked the archaeologists and the anthropologists involved with that project was that it was covered in art. It was covered in images. And it wasn't in a very convenient place. It was in the middle of the desert. And what it was an ancient ritual site. So this discovery shocked and rattled the world of anthropology. The anthropologists previously believed that man, over time, congregated into groups. When it became convenient, when it became safe, they found a safe place to settle. And eventually, downstream comes religion, downstream comes art. This discovery in Turkey unearthed the complete opposite. It unearthed a group of people traveling, encountering a place, realizing it's sacred, and then going through great efforts to build something there, to make art. Hunger. From the oldest days, man has always had a deep desire to both generate and gaze at images. Think cave paintings. Like I said, with food, you might go to the fridge. You might go to 7-Eleven. What you store in your mind is super important. What you look at is super important. So when you look at images, you don't just you don't just store them. You engage them. In a sense, they become you. And at 2 in the morning, when you go to your fridge, what are you going to eat? What are you going to eat? You're going to eat like the least healthy thing. If you're like me, you're going to find the least healthy thing that you stashed away weeks ago. So think about that. Think about that the next time you open Netflix. These images are important. They form us. We become them. It's not just a connection between time lost. I wasted time. Do I want to become this? Do I want to become that? Ask yourself. I think another interesting analogy with food and images is that of taste. So with food, we kind of clearly understand the relationship, but also distinctiveness between, let's say, nutrition and taste, right? If I'm craving a bag of Cheetos, there might be a relationship to maybe my body, but probably not. I'm probably just craving the bag of Cheetos. So let's kind of take that word taste and then apply to the world of images, and let's say the world of art, fine art, when we talk about taste. So in the same way that you have something that's nutritious, that's good for you, and then you have a craving, the craving can help you understand what your body needs, but it's not a direct relationship, right? I believe that images work the same way. That there's images that we want to see, there's images that we want to spend time with, flashing out in front of us on a screen maybe. But there's also images that are good for us. There's images that we need. In a way, images can be like a supplement. I was talking to someone who is recounting being in high school, and they were talking to a psychologist or psychiatrist. I confused the two. And they were bringing up an addiction to pornography. And the psychologist slaps on his desk a little small card. And it was an image of the Shroud of Turin. And he gave it to this young man. And he said, "Your mind is so full of trash. Gaze upon this. Let it fill your mind." Isn't that beautiful? So with food, we can clearly talk about deficiencies. My wife the other day told me that I have, I don't eat enough alkaline foods, because apparently like all the good food is acidic. But when I found that out, I was able to I could try to eat more alkaline foods. I could even buy a supplement of alkaline and start taking it. What if there's something similar with images? What if we could diagnose the problem, our problem, and find the images and let them fill our mind with what is good? What if? So talking of the problem, or let's say the supplement, one way to kind of get at the supplement, what we need, is to talk about what's wrong, right? To diagnose the symptoms. That's one way. The other way is to talk about the cravings. So in terms of like public art, essentially that's kind of expanded to the common good, right? It's a question of society. What does society need? What is the images we need society to fill their minds? It gets a little abstract. And if you wanted to kind of take the route of trying to find the symptoms, I found this text, and it's the best kind of description of the postmodern mindset. And I'm going to read it for you here. "Short and sorrowful is our life. There is no remedy when a man comes to his end, and no one has been known to return from Hades, because we were born for mere chance. And hereafter shall be as though we had never been, because the breath in our nostrils is smoke, and reason is a spark kindled by the beating of our hearts. When it is extinguished, the body will turn to ashes, and the spirit will dissolve like empty air. Our name will be forgotten in time, and no one will remember our works. Our life will pass away like the traces of a cloud and be scattered like the mist that is chased by the rays of the sun and overcome by its heat." It's that beautiful little postmodern poetry is from the Book of Wisdom. So I could sit up here and try to talk about the problem, right? We could sit down and try to be analysts and try to say, trace these things out. How do we find, the cure? What do we need? What are the television shows that we need to produce to save humanity? I don't really know how to do that, so I'm not. I want to talk about the cravings. Personally, I think those are much more interesting. And like I said, the cravings is not a direct one-to-one relationship between what someone needs and what someone wants, but it can help us understand something, right? So the other day I looked up, just Googled, top 10 movies from the past decade. And I think it was 4 of the top 9 were Avengers movies. And that's kind of an unbelievable fact. 4 of the last, these movies might be the most engaged with piece of art in human history. These movies are the most engaged with piece of art in human history. They are the new, Anyway, it's fascinating. So I sat down and I tried to think, why these movies? Like, I don't understand. And it struck me, it's a corporate mythology, right? It's a mythology. The reason that we want to watch the Avengers, the reason that it's desired by so many people, is it's images and stories from across cultures woven together by brilliant people with unlimited money to create very powerful stories. And these stories are universally desirous or desiring, or we desire them. And I think another way of thinking about the Avengers movies is, you could say it's kind of the end of materialism, right? What happens after materialism? Captain America, right? You know, what happens at the end of materialism? Thor. It's this desire for something more, this desire for something superhuman, mythological, alien, supernatural. And I think it's really interesting, the setting of those movies, right? It's not a Middle Earth. It's not a galaxy far, far away. It's New York City circa now, right? It's like this desire for immediate enchantment. I'm going to read to you a poem that's going to kind of transition us into a topic I want to discuss. Is it thy will thy image should keep open my heavy eyelids to the weary night? Dost thou desire my slumber should be broken, while shadows like to thee do mock my sight? Is it thy spirit that thou sendest from thee, so far from home into my deeds to pry, to find out shames and idle hours in me, the scope and tenure of thy jealousy? So what is imagination, right? You know, it's a word we kind of toss around, but what is it? I think it's two things. I think it's images and stories. So earlier I talked about how we become the images that we look at. How does that happen? If we were just kind of a computer storing images, right, that doesn't do much. We take those images and we tell stories. We tell our own story. In a way, you could kind of understand each of us as a culmination of that story that we're working on in our head. So I want to finish or move into another story. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth. There was no one to till the ground. Picture this. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east. And there he put the man whom he had formed. So this is the second chapter of Genesis. Last year when I was here, I read Genesis 1. And in some ways, Genesis 1 is a little more familiar to us. And we can kind of understand the author of Genesis 1 a little more. Like, you know, he's a poet. He's a theologian. God is speaking. He's speaking things into existence. The language in that is so beautiful in Genesis 1. It's this cosmic kind of theology unveil. You have these deep theological concepts like image and likeness unveiling. What is Genesis 2? Like, why do we have Genesis 2? Why is it a story that's so important? I mean, I think yesterday I was reading it and I realized, you know, I think it's a gardener telling this story, right? There's so much language of ground, plant, soil, and then that amazing image that I want to dwell on with you for a little bit Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Why nostrils, right? It's kind of a weird detail. But picture it. Picture that. You are coming alive. You can't really picture that, but you can picture being awoken, right? Awakened. You can picture someone waking you up. Do it right now. And they're waking you up by breathing into your nostrils. I mean, that's a little gross, but you're there. Someone's breathing into your nostrils. You wake up. What do you see? Who do you see? Why do we have stories? And why do we have images? Why do we store stories? Why do we store images? Why do we keep them with us constantly? Is it because we're searching for a particular image? We're scrolling, looking for something. We're trying to find the story. What is that story? Who is that story? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was made nothing that was made. As Christians, we have the story. We know the image. We eat the story. We eat the image. It's what everyone wants. It's what we have. We have to share it. Think about those billions of people watching the Avengers movies. We can do better. We should do better. We have the real stories, the real mythology, the real supernatural. We have the image. It's right there. We just have to receive it. Fiat. We have to become the image. We have to receive the image. We have to eat the image. So I challenge you today to think about that. Think about that. I have the one thing that everybody wants. I'm holding it. Do I hold it? Do I have it? How do I give it away? How do I share it? And that's kind of, right? That's what life's about. You know, you receive the image, you see the image, you search for the image, you become the image. Do you see her? Can you hear her calling? Does he call you? Will you receive him? Are we up to time, or can I go a little longer, or should we do questions? Or
we have time for maybe a couple of questions.
Okay, I think I went a little long there. So anything specific about the paintings? Anything specific about the stories? Maybe we'll take one or two questions.
You want to raise
Right.
your hand? I'll bring them. Sure.
I can tell from the video you prepared them with an awareness that they'd be displayed on K Street. I saw the picture of the storefront when you were doing it. How did it actually affect what you did with each of them, the awareness
Yeah.
of the environment where they would be?
That's a really interesting question. I find as an artist, like having an audience really helps. You can kind of think about who you're painting for. And I think K Street, along with many other busy streets in downtown cities, it's full of people moving fast. It's full of people who don't have time. They don't have time for anything. They got to grab their coffee. They got to, So that was kind of something I was thinking about. Like, okay, how can I grab people? painting huge paintings is probably one way to do that. Again, using these colors, the simplicity. I was also thinking about, again, this idea of like, that I've been, it's been keeping me up at night. All these people that don't know the Christian story. And so I tried to kind of take the iconography and simplify it. So one quick example is you look at the crucifixion. You see that little block above Christ, right? If you know the story, you probably know what 4 letters go in there. And if you don't know what those 4 letters mean. So it's kind of an example of kind of one way to kind of summarize something to kind of make it a little more grabbing and a little bit more legible. And again, the story doesn't change, but the language can, the way we kind of clothe it. Rosemary, do you have time for one more question? Or great. Anyone else have any other questions about paintings? Tom.
Here's the phone.
Hi. How did your style evolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember like when we were painting a few years ago. My paintings were very different back then. So I was, to keep it brief, one way of saying it is when the training I received, I always had to have something in front of me that I was painting. And it really was like the best way to learn, when I was studying with Paul. And so all my early work, like still life and portraiture, and even when I was doing some sacred stories, I'd have models. So it was kind of like painting what I'm seeing, articulating that. And I think, again, that's the best way to learn, studying from nature. But when I started asking the questions of liturgical art, art for kind of ritual prayer, I guess one way to say it is when you think about the Mass is symbolic. The Mass is poetic. The Mass is non-spontaneous in a way. And I say all those things not as like, oh, it's just poetic, or it's just symbolic. It's more real because it's those things. And so I found kind of the more sacred the stories, the more there was kind of this need to move into this kind of more symbolic realm. I think also I was inspired by the iconography of the church. We think of iconography as an Eastern thing, but the Western church had a very established iconography up until the 13th century, and that's kind of where I was using these prototypes. That iconography kind of gets left in the Renaissance, but it's there, and you can kind of, especially now, one of the beautiful things of the internet is you can kind of spend time in some of these places in a small way. So that was the other kind of second thing, is just like seeing some of these beautiful Romanesque, early church, early Gothic work that was just so like grabbing. And I think like as a modern person, I was actually like, I think that some of the naturalist masters of the past, the effect is not the same on the modern mind. Not to say that it doesn't take anything away from their work, but it's more kind of where we are right now. And I think that's largely due to photographs. So if you show someone like, let's say, a beautiful naturalistic depiction, they might kind of brush it aside. Let's say you're kind of walking in New York City and trying to show something. But you show them like an Eastern icon, they're like, whoa, what's going on? Like, who's that alien baby? It's just like you have to kind of grapple with it, and you're like, whoa, this is something. There's something real here. So I found actually that also, pushing people to kind of think more anagogically through this kind of more anagogical, symbolic, pictorial language was part of that process. One more, or? All right, so I think we're going to finish. On your seats, you may be sitting on it, is a little gift. I feel like Oprah. So everybody gets now. This is a little print of the paintings. You probably noticed that. There's also text here, and it's a poem that I'm going to read to you. I co-wrote it with a good friend and great poet, Jacob Surges. So as we started off, kind of try to dwell with these paintings, especially as I'm reading each of the stanzas. You can look at the print, but I would recommend looking at the painting. So starting with the first painting here. The waters felt the breath. The word was spoken into flesh.
And as the Son of all creation, born into the Virgin, he's laid within her hands to rest. The earth's core quaked. The rock's face split. The Son had fled. His mother wept. The Christ cried out and met the dead. His blood and water turned to crust, while the moon threw shadows on the dust. And when by death he trampled death, the Word returned into his breath, and stood, the Son, victorious. Awake, O sleeper, for he will come again for us. Thank you guys so much.